prison of our own making, an isolation chamber, a beautiful mausoleum, museum of madness and folly. The weight of literacy hanging heavy as our ability to function reasonably is erased and replaced with motor functions which fail and have atrophied. Hollow zombies, pale and weak. A purgatory of impure thoughts. An insane Rolodex of self-inflicted violations. The roulette wheel of what life once was. It's dead quiet. Silent. Except for the sirens. Incessant, insistent bleeding. Song to the soon-to-be dearly departed, a desperate symphony of sadness and sorrow. The streets, they're empty. The invisible invasion of a vicious enemy has swept them clean. Maternity wards have become morgues, bars, beauty parlors, bakeries closed. The shelves are bare, overrun with the swell of starving vermin, cannibalizing each other as we too soon will be. We've been quarantined, locked down, an isolation chamber, a beautiful mausoleum, a museum of madness and folly.
That was a special treat for the listeners of the Lydian Spin, an unreleased track I just recorded today, co-opting a new song off of Grid's new album called Decomposing Force, available April 24th on NNA Tapes. I've done a little bit of recording with Grid in the past, and Grid consists of my co-host, that would be Tim Dahl.
Me.
Matt Nelson, who's also with us today.
Hello.
And Nick Pogurski,
Yes.
who's not here right now, but he's here in spirit. Tim and Matt, new album.
Yes.
4 tracks.
4 long tracks. The style of this band is kind of the anti-style of the typical free jazz that we all know, the general view of what free jazz people think what it is. It's a slow burn. It's about the composite, not the individual. It's a little darker. It's a subjective point. I would say a little bit.
Some have called it doom jazz.
I don't care about these titles. You can take
Well,
it for
I
what
mean,
it
we
is.
can call that track we just played unavailable to anybody except for the listeners of the Lydian Spin. Kind of
Yeah, you
doom
can only hear
jazz.
it here, yes.
I think that Grid is one of the sexier. I don't even want to call it a group. It's more like a. It is amongst itself some kind of viral contingent, which it just to me is sexier than most out jazz, which always, I know a lot of it I call, white boy crack dick, just like the sound of frustration. Where this, when I've seen Grid live, it's a lot of the material, and because it's improvised, but you're so in lockstep, it seems very organic. There's a build-up, and as opposed to frustration of most kind of out jazz that goes around, at least the Brooklyn scene, it's something else. It's more like a overstimulation.
The way it came about, everyone plays with each other, and the alchemy and the different combinations. What makes a band, and you can talk about this too, Lydia, what makes a band a band? And it's never one individual. And so often with free jazz, it is about the one individual, and every one individual's part of it just getting their thing. I like that kind of maximalist stuff. I'm not totally against that kind of spastic, everyone getting their thing out. And this wasn't even that self-conscious. When we saw it and when we heard it, we're like, okay, this is something else.
When you saw and heard yourself?
Well, kind of. Yeah. Come on, we all play in a lot of things. And it's like, well, what is this?
Well, and it's very different from a lot of the things you both play in. It's very different from, for instance, what you do in Child Abuse, Tim, or what you do in Retrovirus. It's very different from Matt's solo things or the other bands he's played with. And that difference is some kind of organic buildup. And to me, it sounds more like release, even though it's frantic and frenetic, than it is frustration.
I mean, when I perform these pieces, or when we play, just at least my own experience. I mean, we did a festival in Poland, and this is kind of embarrassing, but I felt so moved. I was like, I can't believe this is happening.
Well, that's how you. That's fucking wonderful, because if you're feeling moved from the stage, other people are too. So Matt, how? Tell us. Jump in.
I'm here. There's so much that growing up learning to play an instrument and be a jazz musician, an improviser, you're told that you need this, personal sound. You have to differentiate yourself from everything that's going on. You have to be you specifically, and I'm into all of that. But that sort of leads to a certain style of playing, especially instrumentally, that you're always just looking to kind of go further, for your own thing and hone that and spend.
And sometimes going further means going deeper and slower.
Well, exactly, and I think that's where
to faster and more frantic.
Yeah, with this band, it's kind of it's like melding everything into something and trying to make it's like less less work for more, more payoff.
Well,
instead of the opposite, which is...
It's like good sex. It just doesn't start out with a hammering, even though it might end up there.
Well, so let's talk about the technique then.
Yeah, let's talk about the technique.
This was not self-conscious. It's just how the band formed. So what Matt's doing is he plays tenor sax. He has his microphone in the bell of his sax. Through these effects going into his amp, my amp is aimed towards him.
And you're playing what kind of bass?
I'm playing kind of futuristic, what most people wouldn't consider
alien Bootsy Collins.
Yeah, it's not funky, but it is in its own way. But it's not. You're not going to dance to it.
Excuse me, I always like to dance.
All right, well, it can be a different type of dance.
I'm the only one. I know.
It's a multi-effects bass, so the timbres are not a typical bass guitar. They're a lot of other things, and we could talk about those, which are ring modulars, distortions, choruses.
Well, treated,
very
right.
But my amp's aimed towards him, Matt, and then his microphone that's in his sax is also picking up me and Nick's percussion.
It's creating these harmonics that are kind of really almost like a gelatin formation.
Got to receive power to generate.
It's like the difference between microwaving and cooking. We're searing the instruments together by searing the sound into his sax. It's basically spitting out this glue.
Yeah, the composite sound is the big
it's
part
not
of it.
it's not again about the individual showing off their quick moves. And I'm not against that. I'm just saying
neither am I, but
there's a lot of that.
This is about really building up from a very live, at least I'm talking about live. The build up is from a very smooth, quiet. It's very sneaky. It's stealth. It builds up from a stealth energy and then just and develops and gets wilder and more gelatinous as it goes along.
So another thing that we did, and it seems so dumb, but it really works. We were in Germany staying at my friend Gunter's.
That would be with Grid.
Yeah, with Grid. We were in his little man cave down in his basement. The boys were having their drinks, and he was doing his little weed on. And he had these kind of trashy neon lights. And I said, you know what? Gunter, can we take these lights with us for on the road? He goes, absolutely. Suddenly, when people have these expectations going to a free jazz concert, and usually there's multiple groups on these bills, they already have this preconceived idea of basically like, I've seen this, I've felt this, and I like, even though they're fans, I like this. Before our set, we turn off the lights, and then someone walks in. Already the environment's different, and it changes the atmosphere. When I was a kid going to the carnival or to a crappy rock concert, if I was really honest, both of those experiences kind of stunk, except for the change of the ambiance and the atmosphere is like a different reality, no matter how low brow it was.
So how did these neon lights create that? So give me a more visual concept of it.
Well,
so where are the neon lights? Are they facing the audience? Are they highlighting you, silhouetting you? What is it?
They're the cylinder stick lights. They're usually, we can change the colors from night to night. Red, blue, black light. But suddenly you have, when we did a festival in Stuttgart, you have the same of all these kind of quote unquote nerdy music bands. Suddenly we're like, wait a second, why don't we just make it look a little bit different?
Yeah,
we don't have a big budget.
It is that dumb. I mean, you just twist it just a little bit.
Most out or far out or alternative jazz or even rock musicians at this point are not much to fucking look at. So are you blinding the audience with the light? Are you making silhouettes of yourself?
Flavin,
Dan Flavin.
It's kind of that style. I mean, it's
But anything that just that puts it someplace else than the usual bearded or non-bearded, bad clothes wearing, t-shirt sporting.
Shift the perception, even ever so slightly. I mean, we do it both ways.
Well, I mean, you kind of do it with smell as well. Because Grid is one of the most intoxicating smelling bands.
That's okay.
Well, we know my penchant for sniffing occasionally at Tim Dahl, one of the reasons he's in Retrovirus. But I must say, Matt Nelson also has a particularly fragrant aroma.
This was the
and part of Grid, I mean, and the thing about Grid is it does kind of hit more than one sense. It's not just an oral; it's kind of an oral, as oral and oral. But it has a different flavor. And part of that is just the setup, the lights, the individuals, and the respect that goes into listening to each other while the set is developing. So let's talk about the new album because it's done in one day, improvised.
Yeah. The thing about this band, people have played enough in their lives. We've been in many different situations. Nick, who's not here, the percussionist, has no jazz training. His thing is classical percussion and pop rock.
He plays kind of like a weird fairy.
Well, that's the thing.
And I mean that in a very like ethereal sense. It's very interesting because he's back there doing this kind of magical tinkering.
He's absolutely a magician.
Very magical.
He's thinking compositionally.
Yeah.
Not that the maximalist spaz drummers don't, but he's not coming from that jazz tradition.
Exactly. He's
so,
not.
So,
right.
so it's a very different angle of how he's going to glue our little sound collage together, and he's kind of developing the momentum. And for some of the
who's really pushing the songs? I mean, because it seems so coherent. When you listen to these tracks, it seems like it's so cohesive, even though it is improvised. The propulsive rhythm, as when it's building up, just seems so incredibly organic, and that's because you're in fucking tune and listening to each other.
Also, if you slow it down, suddenly every step is felt. And every reaction is felt as opposed to a machine gun. And you can feel all those too, don't get me wrong. Then the trajectory starts really shifting all the time. I don't want to...
Well, sometimes you want to be tickled with a feather and sometimes you want to be hit over the head with a hammer. I mean, it's just, or preferably start with one and end with the other.
This is what's interesting though. And not universally, but in general, with this band, the more jazz traditionalists, not just traditional jazz, in all the forms, we kind of get a little look sometimes like, okay, whatever. The non-jazz fans,
Super into it.
They're into it.
Well, of course, because first of all, they're probably not coming with a prejudice. They're coming like understanding this is actually taking what you both have consumed and studied, and it has inspired you someplace else. And I want to talk a little bit for a minute about having had you both over my house together and separately. I know what kind of music we play when we're alone, and with Tim Dahl, look, these guys have incredibly eclectic taste in music. Tim Dahl suffers from some of the worst taste in music.
That's
I've
not
actually
true.
been at parties at his house where he knows the look on my face, which is, if you don't play some James Brown right now, I'm going to kill somebody. But he also, when he comes over to my house, we play a lot of Parliament Funkadelic.
It's the best taste of the worst type of music.
Tell me a little about your bad taste in music, Tim.
Well, I mean, sure.
It's
I
part
try
of
to
your
paraphrase.
generation, your humor. I have no idea.
No. It's not all that. It's the music in my output is the representation of my aesthetic, but I'm curious about things beyond my aesthetic, even stuff that I don't like. As a young musician, I was soaking in everything before I even determined an aesthetic.
All right. Well, I want to come back to that for a minute, but I want to say that when Matt Nelson comes over and hangs out with me, I know what we're going to listen to. We're going to listen to Dr. John. We're going to listen to some groovy, deep, southern, kind of slow jam
Oh boy.
Oh, yeah.
stuff. Because
Take it to the swamp.
yeah, and so Matt, I want to talk to you a little bit about, like, as a kid, what made you decide to pick up the sax, not the easiest instrument and not the most...
Well, some would argue what it is the easiest.
I haven't heard Matt Nelson play it.
Kind of is an
why
easy
the sax
instrument,
and not the
actually.
guitar? I mean, and first of all, what music was inspiring you? Like, okay, before you even had a sax, what were you listening to in the
Yeah.
Bay Area, which is where you're from?
Yeah, it is where I'm from. Well, my mother was playing music in the house all the time growing up.
What kind of stuff?
Good music. Motown was the stuff that was always going. There were classical music happening
Classical
in the
rock
morning.
as well.
Classic rock, of course. I mean,
The Temptations.
yeah, and then classic also. Rolling Stones, all of that, British bullshit, Led Zeppelin.
British Invasion.
Yeah, exactly.
Nothing wrong with early Led Zeppelin?
No, of course. I was
Stones, I love.
Hey,
absolutely. Well,
sympathy for this
that was
devil,
my
if you don't
first
mind.
performance as a child was 6 years old at the water park in the summer. It was a free open enrollment lip syncing contest, and I went up there and won it to satisfaction by the Rolling Stones in front of
Lip-syncing.
lip
Wait,
syncing.
okay.
6 years old.
Hold up right
won
now.
the whole fucking thing.
Matt Nelson, somebody that I know personally, is forever, I wouldn't say unsatisfied, but seeking further satisfaction.
Exactly.
From the age
Well,
of 6, he knew it.
That's it.
So you started as a drag queen.
Yes, I was
All right,
strutting my
lip-singing,
stuff up there at Raging
simple.
Waters, and
So you got your
San
first
Jose,
taste
California.
of glory.
that's it.
And
And,
then
then
when
it
you
was
get-
there was no turning back
turning
after
back,
that.
yeah,
no
yeah.
turning
All
back.
right. So then, I mean, how do you convince your parents to get you a saxophone, one of the most noisy and irritating instruments? If you don't know
Yeah.
how to play it, it's just horrible.
They were very tolerant. I will say that about my parents
What
and
made you say
thank them for that.
sax?
Extremely tolerant
What
and
made you choose that?
many aspects of me as a child, and making noise was certainly one of those.
So Matt, though, I'm just curious because I know how the history of public school music education is.
Mm-hmm.
Was it basically it's like the hard sale, like Glengarry Glen Ross, these music directors when you're
That's
young.
it. Yeah,
they
you
around,
go
like,
in,
They
they'll-
pick on a kid like, here, you're playing sax. And
Oh
you're
yeah.
like, okay.
No, actually, it wasn't I
that.
chose to play
Okay,
sax
when?
because
What age did you
fifth
decide?
grade. Age
Fifth grade.
10. Well, you actually, the reason I wanted to is because you weren't allowed to play the saxophone. You could only do clarinet, trumpet,
What?
flute.
Sax was banned?
What
Sax,
school
you-
was this?
This was a, whatever, public elementary school. But it
Always
was,
a rebel, Matt Nelson.
you couldn't switch to the saxophone until you were older.
Why?
Because it was too loud or obnoxious or something. They didn't want a bunch of
weird.
And we know you
younger
were
kids.
always young and loud and obnoxious.
Well, exactly. So I wanted to be more loud and more obnoxious than all the other fucking kids. So I'd,
was there a
took
sax
it up.
player that inspired you at that age?
Yeah, Charlie Parker.
How old were you in the fifth grade?
Yeah, 5th grade.
Wow.
Oh,
I mean,
you're
that-
hearing
that-
Charlie
yeah,
Parker.
Yeah, that's pretty.
That was on in the house. The parents
taste.
were always playing good
Interesting.
music. Yeah.
because for me, like I played jazz when I was younger, but if I was really honest, I wasn't sophisticated enough to really kind of understand what
Tim,
that was.
back to you for a minute. I mean, what made you pick up the bass, and how old were you when you decided that I'm going to play the bass?
All right, so my parents signed my brother and I up to everything to keep us out of trouble. So that was piano lessons,
fully
art,
troublematic,
sports, or whatever. Or they wanted to culture us, whatever it was. They wanted to occupy us and keep us occupied. I did piano, but then, if I'm really honest about it, I mean, I was exposed to classical music and art music, but it was pop rock is what I fell in love with. And what was on
who at what age?
I mean, it's age 7 and 6. First it started with my parents' record collection, which was like Beatles, Stone, the classic stuff that parents had. My mom was into Billie Holiday and Motown and that stuff. And I listened to it, but then when I was 7, I mean, this is not why I started playing bass, but when I was 7, the first albums I got were Diver Down, Van Halen. I was like, Mom, can you get me this? Well, basically what's on the...
Why not? Whatever.
Whatever's on I like that album. I love that album.
We won't go into how David Lee Roth once tried to pick me up and I had to turn
I would like to go into that.
No. He asked me if I was looking for trouble. I said, not from him. Go on.
I'm basically a contrarian. Everyone was playing guitar or drums, and I wanted to play bass. Now, the thing is, I didn't know what any of those notes were, but I could play just dumb pop.
And so how old were you when you convinced your parents to get you a bass?
11.
Yeah. And so you got a bass. Now what are you doing?
I'm playing roots, just like most dumb rock.
Yeah.
Bass is just playing the roots, and then I'm the only kid that's playing bass.
Yeah.
So then suddenly...
And you must have been one of the only kids playing sax, Matt.
Well, I mean, yeah, definitely out of the kids I hung out with and friends and,
Matt,
bands
okay, so
and
Matt,
stuff.
you get a sax.
Yeah.
How confusing is that thing? I mean, do you just pick it up, start do you know it's for you?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I could make loud noises almost immediately, and that was
So it didn't matter as
intriguing.
long as they were loud and annoying. You were already kind of no wave. As a youngster.
Oh yeah, honking it out.
Skronking.
Yeah, exactly.
The honky.
Yeah.
Skronking honky.
Hello.
So, I mean, both of you, this is what's interesting to me is, both of you are highly educated. I mean, you went to school for music. You went to the Oberlin Conservatory of Music. Tim, you went to...
UMass Amherst.
Right, and you studied under Tim?
I studied under a few people. My bass teacher was a guy, Salvatore Macchia, but that was contrabass. We're already jumping a bunch of years here, but that's on double bass. And he was even though he had a history with jazz, he was more of a new music guy and medieval music. So, he was
medieval music.
Everything. But he's also a big new. He went to Yale, Boulez, and all this stuff. But then my under jazz was Yusef Lateef,
which, by the way, I mean, people really need to research Yusef Lateef, which
genius.
I mean, absolutely
a genre unto himself.
Yeah, absolutely a genre unto himself. Some of my favorite recordings by Yusef Lateef. Please look him up.
He has a long history, and he's actually his Christian birth name was Bill Evans. So there's three Bill Evans in jazz: a piano player, him, and then there's a later sax player.
But I mean, how amazing to study! Did you
My
know
favorite
who he was
one.
when you started studying under him?
I'm sorry, what was the question?
Did you know who Yusef Lateef was when you started studying?
I actually did.
Because now you're 20 or something.
Yeah, exactly. I knew who he was, but I hadn't dove in beyond to what he actually really was. Okay. And he was very open because I was also into satanic death metal and noise, Japanese noise, and all this other stuff that he was
Brutarian, anything really severely Brutarian.
Yeah, so he was not exposed to that, but he liked me a lot, and I could bring that stuff in. He would very open-minded, and we would just... He was really cool. Not that I needed this lesson, but he really wanted to hammer this point in because I would ask him about different musicians he played with, ones that were like my heroes, ones
like who? Who were your heroes?
I mean, the list is long. For jazz, I asked him about Tony Williams. I asked him about... but specifically, I asked him if he had played with Jaco Pastorius, who is basically... The electric bass is Jimi Hendrix. And now a lot of Jaco's music is terrible, but he's an incredible bass player. Yeah. And he once stopped me. He goes, but Tim, you don't want to play like him, do you? I was learning all that stuff and I was cutting my teeth and all that stuff. And I knew I didn't want I wanted to be my own voice, but he was basically like, you got to be yourself. It never works otherwise. You got to be yourself.
Exactly. So Matt, now you're playing the sax as a youngster. You're going through like normal school, and then how do you get into Oberlin? I mean, did you have to apply? Did you get a scholarship? I mean,
Yeah,
you're
both,
obviously
yeah.
not stopping. You're not putting the sax down.
No, yeah,
Even though
I
there
did.
might not be at that time anybody who wants it except for you.
Well, I did. Where I grew up in the Bay Area, there was good public school music programs. So I played in jazz band in the high school, and
what jazz were you exposed to that really made you want to continue, going where you were going?
well, all of it. I mean, I became, similar to Tim. It was a contrarian thing. I mean, I sort of got into the saxophone, and then I realized this isn't so cool to everyone else, which made it cooler to me that I was, getting deep into all of this very strange music.
And who were you really getting into then? That started
it started with the jazz saxophone guy, Dexter Gordon, John Coltrane, Sonny Rollins, and then from there on.
By the way, I mean, Tim just said, as I was playing him my mashup of The Weight of Literacy, which I bootlegged myself onto from your new album, he mentioned that you were sounding really like Sonny Rollins today.
Timbre's an interesting thing, and some people put more...
it is so lush, what you're doing. It's lush is the way I have to describe it.
Well, thank you. I mean,
He's blushing. Whoa.
Well, it's people say, "Oh, you sound like this person. You sound like that." Some people take that as an insult, like, "Hey, I'm me." But I mean,
you sound lush. I don't know how else to put it.
No, I do.
Well, I mean, obviously, Sonny Rollins is considered one of the most incredible sounds, maybe the most incredible tenor sax timbral examples ever.
Well, that's always what I thought. The first thing that hits you is the sound. It doesn't matter technically what you're popping out or have worked out. Does it hit?
There are different philosophies.
It's a fleshy thing.
Well, one of our peers,
it's a fleshy sound.
One of our peers, one of our good friends and brilliant musician, Weasel Walter, claims he puts timbre low on the hierarchy, and he's more about action and movement, designs, and then some people.
And a lot of the stuff then, I mean, because it becomes more brittle, which is part of it. I mean, part of it is the brittle brutality.
It's all woven in there, so it's hard to really separate out.
And that's also a point of sensuality in music, which I want to bring up because, like I said, I've seen a lot of concerts in New York and Brooklyn with really great musicians of all different caliber, all in this out jazz scene. And for the most part, I'm going to say it, a woman that likes to feel physically stimulated by music, sometimes have felt it cold, other than the fact that it's hyperactive, so it's like a hard chronic wank. Coming back to grid, it's a different vibration. It's a different thing. And I mean, there is a sensuality in there, even when it's frantic and frenetic. And part of that is the space the sound occupies.
The witchcraft, the alchemy of timbre.
Well, that's why I love it.
Well, the thing is, I mean, there are some rules with instruments and timbre, but at the end of the day, it is this kind of intuitive magic. Music can be notated rhythm, pitch, that you can really break it down to the most extreme
you still
detail.
Can't capture certain things. You can never
is just
quantify exactly what it is. Yeah,
I'm going to butt
in.
And
it doesn't exist without the technicality either. So when I say,
but it's not really notated. Everything else can be notated.
Okay, I have to butt in right here because look, I am not a musician, although I use music. I've played with incredible musicians, and when I'm sitting with Matt Nelson, Tim Dahl, and we're mentioning also Weasel Walter. These guys, and I've heard all of them speak on systems of music that I cannot comprehend, but it gets me dizzy and excited because it's so beyond my comprehension. It's like the same reason I love mathematics and I love numbers, and part of these systems have to do with numbers that we still cannot decode. I always say that Weasel is like a song with too many notes for anybody to fucking hear. And both Tim Dahl and Matt Nelson and Weasel, they understand either through just their innate genius or going through academia, which, as a 10th grade dropout, I did not. I come to music, or I listen to music on a more visceral level. I'm not a musician. I'm a minimalist. They're all, in a sense, maximalist in the sense that they can go from holding one note and Matt Nelson, sometimes we're going to compare how long we can both hold our breaths, to just making the most chaotic and symphonic, composed or improvised music that the world has ever heard. I'm actually so in awe and so thankful to know and work with these people. This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, Matt Nelson of Grid. We're going to hear a track now from Grid's new album.
Yes.
It's called
Cold Seats. And this is we're not going to hear the whole thing. It's a 12-minute jam, but you'll get the idea. It's underwater dystopian nightmare. But there's tears.
The signal is frayed, but it's still coming through.
There's tears.
It's available April 24th on NNA Tapes.
Yes.
Grid's new album, Decomposing Force. This track is called
Cold Seep.
This is the Lydian Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and Matt Nelson, two members of Grid. Tim also of Child Abuse and Retrovirus. Matt,
And Flying Loonbuggers.
And Flying Loonbuckers, Weasel Walters, magnificent
Band.
expositions, explosions. Tim, I want to talk a little bit about how we came to work together, first of all, which
Sure.
is through Weasel Walter. He brought you into Retrovirus. You weren't really that aware of my music, but you brought something really unique to it, which I really loved and respected because we have a very intimate relationship on stage.
Yes,
I
we
feel.
do. And that wasn't not just performance, but even musically. And I remember asking you early in our
musical
musical
relationship.
connect. Yes, I said, Lydia, who are some of the great bass players you worked with? And you paused, and you're basically like, no one but you. It's what you got. That's
Well,
what you said
one
at the
who's
time.
dead, and that's about it. Yeah,
yeah. But no, but
George Scott, but he died. But anyway.
if I was going to try to do a synthesis.
Well, wait. I just want to make a point for a minute here. A lot of the musicians I worked with are not considered great musicians, but they were considered visionaries. And I always say, if you don't have a vision, don't give it a fucking sound. So, for instance, when I'm coming up, unschooled, non-musical, wanting to do spoken word, and creating music, either writing it myself like Teenage Jesus or Beirut Slump, or, writing Queen of Siam with my mouth or whatever, or with Eight-Eyed Spy, it's like a lot of the musicians I worked with were not musicians, but they had a vision, or I had a vision, and thought that they could bring something to that. And, as time goes on, for instance, working with Roland S. Howard, who was an incredible guitar player, working with, Robert Quine, who played on Queen of Siam, and going on from there, it's like vision is very important. And then there comes a point where after you have the vision, and I'm talking about Retrovirus, so I had the vision and had recorded all of this music, and then brought Bob Bird, who my oldest friend and seen more shows than any man alive, and Weasel Walter, and he brought you in. And it was really elevating the level of musicianship for what were a lot of very almost infantile musical compositions.
The way I approached your songs was, can I get away with murder every night? And
With me you can.
Because some of the songs have wider margins and some of them have narrow margins to still realize what the spirit of that song is supposed to be.
And the bass was never the priority in most
No.
of the music that I did. It was always the guitar.
But you never, every now and then you'll say, this is not right, but that's almost never. You always trusted me to interpret it in a way that was satisfying to me. But it
Extremely
also,
satisfying to
but
me.
by doing that, by not micromanaging that, it gave me sort of like raising a young child, that balance between discipline and freedom.
Well, because a lot of the music is so much simpler than the music you write, you create, or you perform. It's rudimentary. It's nursery rhymes. It's almost infantile, except for, of course, I loved when you were forced into playing drums for the one Teenage Jesus reunion, which Weasel Walter had to teach you how to play the drum like a monkey because it was so reductionary beyond your comprehension. Oh, I loved that. Was so sadistic. I loved it.
Well, that was a special occasion, and
We'll never do that again. Don't worry.
I enjoyed that. I'm happy I got to play in Teenage Jesus and the Jerks.
Well,
But I'll shorten it up. So basically,
happened.
our connection on stage,
Through Retrovirus.
working together, it was just like in any relationship. There has to be some kind of consensual agreement, no matter how brutal that can be.
I expect complete satisfaction. Good fucking luck. Get in line, mother.
So how do you realize it with your own satisfaction, and what can I get away with, and how can I? But that's also a challenge on myself. How can I be me
with such simplistic music, simplistic rock and roll music? Yes.
And this is when I first joined the band, and it was before I even did the first tour, which was in 2013. A friend of mine who's a big music fan, I said, "Oh, I'm gonna go on the road with Lydia Lunch," and he knows my style, knows my history. He said, "Is that going to satisfy you?"
Exactly.
Well, guess what?
What?
7 years later, here I am still.
Exactly. And what exactly
Satisfaction
was
guaranteed.
satisfying about it to you, though, Tim? Because a lot of times you are just playing dunderheaded riffs that you did not write, that you have to kind of carry, because Weasel's off into his own world, taking to the next step guitar players that were amazing. Bob is just doing the voodoo beat in the background. I've got my own thing, but your position is kind of unique because you have to hold the bottom, be steady, yet be intense.
Yeah, so basically, I'm kind of that glue between
You are the glue.
Bob, you, and Weasel, and so that is.
And we have the most intimate contact on stage.
Steady time meets chaos. And the thing is, one of my biggest satisfactions in life is not just musically, just in everything, is total chaos
and freedom.
And freedom, and then being able to rope it in like a lasso whenever I fucking want to on a fucking dime.
Rope-a-dope. Now, Matt Nelson, we've done some shows together, both you like as a solo act, opening for some of my curatorial things, and also with some gigs that we did with Tim Dahl as a duet plus one. And what's that about? What's that like?
Well, I was thinking about it with why your spoken word stuff works well with grid in general, and I think there's a certain thing that happens with improvising instrumentalists, that there's this communication that you, at least I can only speak for myself, but listening to a lot of that music also, I hear it, that there's this desire for like almost a more quicker hit, of information response and exchange, faster than language, than our normal spoken language. So something that appeals to me about improvisation with an instrument that's not involving words and written language is that you're communicating in a way that sometimes feels quicker than it does when you're talking to someone. Not necessarily to you, because it's pretty quick fire is the the usual vibe on the Lydian spin.
Yes.
So now I'm going to spin it on.
But wait a second, I want to hear the rest of this.
Well,
though.
I'm going to say it's something about improvising with you is it's a balance between those two, because I feel the simpatico, the exchange of information that's not like talking to someone, but I'm also cognizant of the language itself. So I think that goes into when grid is playing with you and doing your spoken word stuff, and then also...
Well, which is not improvised, by the way. I mean, the only thing that's improvised in my spoken word is the emotion at the moment, because I'm not an improviser per se. So if I come to the stage, it's with a set of text. Sure. Now, I want to talk about my first collaboration with grid. So I was doing an album called Marquesa, which was based on the philosophy of Desaad and my writing, how much we had in common. And I was using various tracks of music from various people, and including Weasel Walter gave me a track, which I then kind of configured, and I asked Grid for a track. And the track that I chose for me, I don't remember the name of it or where it came from, but I remember that the piece I read was from Paradoxia, A Predator's Diary, and it was about being chronically unsatisfied. And that was a successful...
Can't get no.
It goes back to your youth. And after that, I mean, it was just... Because I do a lot of work with GarageBand, and I do a lot of psychoambient music. I don't really write music, but I do like to recompose other people's music. And especially, it's bizarre because when I'm dealing with out improv or compositional out jazz, to me, it's like crocheting something together. But sometimes, for instance, the track we heard at the beginning of this conversation, I literally just pushed record and started at the beginning of the song, and I loved the title, which you explained to me the other night, The Weight of Literacy, which is just such a great title.
Talk to Tim about
that. Had to
one.
work that in. And also working with Tim in a duet, or when we've done it together, it's refreshing because, as I'm doing right now, this is just an example. In music, to me, in spoken word, I'm just doing it as hypnosis. It is really the space between breaths, or the space before something becomes frantic, where the power and the dynamic is. And the same way that I started spoken word hysterical 40 years ago, and I've had to sophisticate it down into what I'm doing right now, which is a form of hypnosis, which is understanding where the power is, and sometimes it's in the pause.
Oh, well,
that's a classic jazz
criticism is classic fucking criticism of a lot of music. Stop fucking playing. And the thing is, when I hear Thelonious Monk, not to go in that direction,
why not?
The rests are, to me, more powerful than the notes. And
well, because it's like holding your breath. It is the mystery between the next essence.
But what's amazing about when Thelonious plays with those rests, the rests have as much conviction as the notes. And there's basically every element, the silence is equally as actively involved as the actual
Well, it's
action.
something
And
I
the
had to
sound.
learn as a budding hysteric when I first started creating. Of course, as my songs were instrumental, but still, the space and the pause, and as an early spoken word artist, which was just like a machine gun, which is effective to a certain degree in short bursts. You have to sophisticate beyond that. And for instance, playing with somebody like Roland S. Howard, originally in The Birthday Party, and then These Immortal Souls, Crime in the City Solution, and the reissue of his 2 solo albums, which are amazing, from which I just came off a tribute tour to. It's always in the space between breaths, as I call it. And it's also what makes grid interesting is that it's not so much the space between breaths, it's that it starts with a deep inhalation a lot of the time, at least the live shows, and then builds up and builds up. And again, back to good sex. You don't start hammering the headboard. You start tickling the pinky toe. Let's hear another track by Grid, shall we?
Yes, this is from the first recording, which the title is the minus sign / the plus sign.
Minus plus,
yes. And this one is...
it's from the first album.
Yeah, it's from the first record. Yes.
Called?
Self-titled.
Self-titled.
Yeah.
Self-titled Grid. On NNA Tapes.
Same
Still
thing.
available.
And by the way, NNA Tapes is not just...
Cassettes.
Cassette is the
They started
is the
out
token.
as a small tape label, but they do all formats now. This Decomposing Force, the new record, will be out digitally and on vinyl.
It's important to have digital releases at this point because you know what? I mean, it's very... we've got enough
with the
junk.
exception of Thirst and More, basically everyone hates cassettes. And
Oh, I fucking hate cassettes. I always have. I've always hated 8-track cassettes. I don't even like vinyl. As a matter of fact, I do prefer downloads because, as you can tell, I live in a pretty austere... I don't like to collect anything at this point.
Those are just those are tokens.
It's true at this
Look,
point.
I want the meat of the matter delivered to me directly, and that's usually at this point a download. That's why we all have Bandcamp.
Here we go.
Here we go, and here's Grid. been the Lydia and Spin with Lydia Lunch, Tim Dahl, and Matt Nelson. They're waiting for me to pull something out of my ass as if it's like some magical cave where all knowledge exists. I wish it could be said so. I'm just going to repeat what I said earlier. If you don't have a vision, don't give it a sound. These guys with Grit have created something absolutely unique, something that's mandatory listening, and of course, especially when I add my voice of unique intimacy to it.
Yeah.
And I love to just co-opt their music to do such. There will be more in the future.
Once the world's up and running.
No. It doesn't matter whether the world is up and running or falls flat on its fucking face. We continue to create, even if it's in isolation. We're doing this podcast in seclusion in my compound. We're sitting a safe distance from each other, but we've all been tested in more ways than one. If only they would actually release fucking tests for this latest pandemic. It doesn't matter. We're all safe. Are you? Are you safe? Do you feel safe? I hope you are.